give a quick walkthrough of my Marvelous Designer process. I thought it'd be helpful to see. You'll definitely want some experience with this program before doing this, but I tried to keep it as simple as possible. You can see my first step here is just blocking in a very simplistic shirt pattern. You can just copy those shapes, and I'm draping that over my model just to get an initial block out. I'm not trying to be too granular with this. I'm just trying to get the major forms. And so you can see here I created a quick sleeve, just making sure that the sleeve cap matches up with the sleeve hole, and I'm dragging it a little bit just to make sure the folds read okay. Then I'll duplicate that, and you can see that I'm going to be using draping and pins a little bit just to make the process a little easier. You won't have to use arrangement points or anything. You can just kind of drape and sew, and then here I am pushing around a little bit just to reinform those folds I'm going to be using for the stylized model. And here is going to be the cowl for the neck, just using those pins and kind of moving it around as simple as possible, and I'll just be sewing those together and then sewing that to the open neck hole. Since this is going to be a stylized model, I'm really focused on the folds not being as accurate as possible, but being something that reads well. I'm going to just duplicate the cowl here to create the back of the neck, and I'm going to be strengthening it just so it holds its shape a little bit. Not really using a bunch of fancy materials, I'm just using the default sim and a little bit of strengthening just to make sure I'm getting the shapes that I need. So don't worry too much about that. Here I'm going to be rolling up the sleeves twice. It creates a really nice effect here. It's something I really like doing in Marvelous. Just going to enhance the shape slightly based on the folds I'd like to be getting. Trying not to get too granular in those details. Here I'll be adding a little bit of thickness, maybe thicker than I'd make a normal model just for that stylized appearance. I can always rework this in Blender later, so try not to get too caught in it at this stage. Here I want to add a zipper, so I'm just going to unsew those two edges in addition to unsewing the cowl, cutting that in half. The zipper tool in Marvelous is great. You can just export it and use it in your own work. You can change the size and such. So you'll see here I'm going to take the zipper tool and just zip up the coat here. And that'll just create the zipper there. And then I will just go in and unzip that using a pin to kind of create the shape I'm looking for here. I'm just going to increase the size of that zipper just to create a nice definition in that edge. And I'm just going to keep making this a little bit thicker until I start to see the shapes that I would like to see. Just pushing and pulling as much as needed, but not too much. Okay, so to export this, you're going to want to go into here, and you're going to want to make sure that your model is in quads. So you want to go to mesh style, and then I'm going to go quad optimized. And then you'll see here that you're going to get some fairly decent geo. They're going to go to File, Export, OBJ. And then we're going to go thin. I'm going to turn off the avatars because I don't want those graphics and trims so I can keep the zipper. And I'm going to keep this as is, press OK and let that export. Okay, and then once you're back in Blender, you're going to have a nice mesh with your zipper and a relatively usable geo mesh. I like it like this to keep it thin because I can add a solidify modifier and easily adjust things. I also like to have a secondary window opened with the wire overlays, all these overlays turned off just to keep things clean. And I'm going to be rendering it in Eevee with this lighting scenario. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is make a shader for this so I can actually see what's going on. I'm just going to give the entire garment one shader for now. Put a new one, call this clothing. Then we're going to want to open up a shader editor slot. So I'm going to share with you one of my favorite ways to create like a very simple, I guess it's not really simple, but a toon shader that's really versatile. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to add in a color, and this will take the place of the map we'll paint later. From there, I'm going to add a multiply node, and I'm going to be multiplying on top of this mesh a simplified version of a shadow, like a cell shaded shadow that's very crisp. So to do that, I'm going to take this diffuse BSDF, I'm going to do shader to RGB, and I'm going to add a color ramp. This is a very common technique for creating toon shading. I've just added a little bit of glitz and glam to it. And I'm going to go ahead and multiply that on top. Right now you're not really going to see anything, but when we start dragging these sliders in, and this kind of changes depending on your lighting in the scene. So if I just turn off my lights and I only keep the lights from the scene on, you can kind of see if I rotate this, we're going to get a low poly kind of look to it, and it'll change with how you decide to do this. And of course you can add your own lights to the scene, like if you wanted to add a sunlight. So I'm going to take my principled BSDF and I'm going to turn the roughness all the way up, and already you can see that it's starting to get a little bit flatter. You can turn this up to this, and if you wanted to change this to be a different color, you could just take this, change this. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another layer of shading. So I'm going to add a Fresnel. I'm going to multiply this in because it creates another like level of shadows that I really like. And then I'm going to use a color ramp here to restrain that value range, just like so. I'm going to plug that into here. So what this will do, it basically adds more shading in. I'm going to invert this, plug that in here, and you can kind of see right away what's happening. And if you drag this around or increase or decrease this factor, you can kind of add in a little bit more juice and nuance to those shapes. And this will change based on your camera angle, but I still think it looks cool and adds a lot of depth. I'm going to separate these pieces out, and I'm going to add a solidify here. I'm going to merge by distance and recalculate normals and clear custom spit so it merges everything. And then I'm going to add a bevel just to soften that top edge. And in here I'm going to turn off clamp overlap, add that bevel, and so now we've got some thickness. And if you want this to be a little easier to work with, I would just reduce some of these polygons and clean this up a little. You'll see why I'm reducing this down so much in a second. For this particular piece, I want it to be lower poly so I can have easier time manipulating it. So I'm going to take these, I'm going to dissolve those edges, and then I'm going to go over here and I'm going to throw on a subdivision surface. I'm going ahead and apply that scale just so I can get this a little bit thicker, and just drag that under there. And then we're going to want to just crease this so it matches up at the bottom. And from here, you can basically just drag out to whatever shape you want. I'm going to go ahead and add a secondary fold here, and I'm just going to basically poly model in some of the shapes that I see. And I'll probably spend a very long time adjusting this shape. I just wanted to show you really quickly how you might go about doing it. You can even use the soft select tool and just kind of drag. So you'd end up with something a little similar to this, and you want to make sure to maintain some of those more polygonal edges just to keep the interest. You can use a crease if you want to try and like sharpen some of those edges. You don't have to, but if you want to, you can just get a little sharper like that. And then I ended up just keeping a lot of the geo that was here because I liked it, but I'm going to go ahead and enhance it, namely by separating out these pieces from the zipper. From here, I'm going to go ahead and add, let's see if a solidify will work. First of all, apply that scale because the scale comes in kind of crazy. So you want to go through and just mark all of these seams. Just like so, and then I'm going to go ahead and select one of those edges, select similar seam, and I'm just going to go into here and add bevel weight to that, and crease it. Okay, another technique I'm going to do is add a bevel, just so I can really capture those seams. I'm going to do it by weight, because we just marked all those seams. Turn off clamp overlap, make sure that scale's applied. I'm just going to drop this down really low. From here I'm also going to add in a subdivision surface, just to make it a little bit smoother. And from here I'm going to go straight into unwrapping so I can give these the proper colors. I'm going to unwrap angle based, and we should get pretty good UVs because we marked those seams already. A way that you can check your UVs is to add a UV grid, and then in here you can add an image texture. And let's just go ahead and put this in here just so we can get started with the texturing process. And we're going to go ahead and put that texture on. And here you can see how it's starting to look toon shaded. And you can see here the textile density differences. If we want them to be the same, we would shrink this down, but because I'm hand painting it, it doesn't matter as much. I just want to make sure that the squares are even. From this point on, I'm just going to go in and start color blocking. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead and add in the texture for the color. So I'm just going to create a clothing material, and then I'm going to fill it with orange, and I'm going to plug it in where the color was before, so everything should be about the same. And then from here, I'm just going to basically be coloring in blocks, and I'm basically going to be using the edit selection tool to fill in different colors with the paint bucket. And one of the things I like to do is set it to flat texture so you can clearly see the colors you've got going on. And now, if we go into texture paint, we should be able to do that, and fill that in. Another neat trick, if you go in here and you select an edge and you mark seam, you can use it as a mask. So if you select it with L and you go into texture paint and you turn on the mask, you can basically just fill it with whatever color you want. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the hand painting part of this demonstration. Basically, I'm going to go into texture paint mode, and I have a brush pack here that I use basically one brush of. And it is this flat marker. I'm going to change this to flat, and I'm going to add in a shadow here just to kind of help me visualize where I'm going to hand paint some of my shadows. You can make this darker, move it around. That seems good. You can also throw on the wireframe. It helps with a slightly darker color here. And the core idea here is just to keep one dark tone and one light tone for as long as possible. So I'm just going to go in and kind of like roughly paint. I'm actually going to turn off the sensitivity so I can keep it one tone as long as possible. I'm going to go in and paint like this. You really want to look at it from all angles so you can really tell where the shadows are falling. I'm basically painting in as if I am creating the toon shadow shapes. Even though I already have a toon shader, this will just help sell it a little bit more. Really paying attention to those grooves and dips. Specifically, the protrusions upwards are going to be more lit by the light that's supposed to be coming down like this. Just like so, and I will turn off the shadow, and now I will allow myself a little bit more tone. So I'm basically going to go in at the edges here and pick a more saturated color. Imagine where the soft edge would be, and I'm going to paint this sort of half tone. Now I can kind of go in with the soft brush since a lot of my core shapes have been defined here. Okay, and then after I'm going to go in and paint the darkest areas where the AO would be, so that's like in seams and such, deep cracks. And as a final touch, I'm just going to add a little bit of hashing. Got to kind of be sparing with these, because they can become texturally overwhelming. You can add in a little of the highlight color too. I kind of like to think of them as like transitional And the final technique I'm going to use here is I'm going to add another solidify. This is called the inverted hull method. So I'm basically going to go to materials and I'm going to set the material offset to 1. I'm going to flip the normals. I'm going to go into my materials and I'm going to add a new. I'm going to change this to emission so it's just blank. Make this a dark color I'd like the outline to be. Make sure that the camera back basically on its shadow, and that's on as well. And then in here you can see it's already having an effect. Let's make it a little darker. If you play with this, you'll see it kind of appears like an outline. And then let's add it here as well. And there you go. Just like that, you've got a sick anime style, hand-painted, stylized piece of clothing. Hope you found this useful, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. All right, bye.